Thank you very much. I really appreciate you all being willing to share with me what I consider to be your most valuable resource, and that's your time. And I will do my best to use it well. I grew up in this area. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, and so coming back is nice for me because I'm now in Oklahoma City. And I was one of those like nerdy government high school kids who I would read the Washington Post and find out if there was a cabinet member testifying on Capitol Hill, and I'd take the metro down and sit in the audience just to see a member of the cabinet. And so for me to be able to speak to you all working here on Capitol Hill is still a thrill for me. Now that nerdy student government kid became a nerdy data professor. And so what I'm here to talk to you about is data on what I think is the most trustworthy data that directly links pornography and different public health harms, be that erectile dysfunction, be that sexual violence, be that brain development. And I do this from a perspective of having worked 25 years to try to figure out how is it that we can prevent sexual violence. And I did my dissertation on that, and as I said, wrote several books about it. But I worked for so long to try and figure out how do we end sexual violence. And it wasn't until 10 years ago that I realized that the secret ingredient that was missing from putting this together was actually not so secret at all. But the secret ingredient in the recipe to end rape was actually pornography. And I've studied that more and more ever since, because what I've found is that pornography has rewritten the sexual script for the millennial generation, and it is now rewiring the brains of the generation that comes after that. Now, today's pornography, as you know, it's not your father's Playboy magazine. Obviously, people can get to novel images that are infused with sex and violence on the internet at the drop of a hat. And you heard earlier, about 88% of the scenes in today's internet or in today's pornographic movies contain violence, usually by a man towards a woman. Well, I want to give you a follow-up to that research that is actually from the same study. If you take a look at what happens before and after certain things in pornography, it's fascinating. When someone is aggressive towards another, usually a man hitting a woman, when someone is aggressive or violent towards another in porn, 95% of the time, the exact same thing happens. Either that individual, usually a woman, responds with pleasure, or they have no response at all. So wrap your mind around that for a second. A man hits a woman, almost all the time she likes it, or she just has no response. My biggest worry is, what is that doing to the 11-year-old boy who's watching that? He's getting the message, I guess she likes to be hit. What is that doing to the young girl who's watching this? Well, I guess if he hits me, I should like it. And unfortunately, that is what's happening. Now, you've heard a whole lot about what's degrading in pornography. I'm actually going to skip over that because I think we've heard a lot of that already, because I want to tell you a little bit about the brain. For a long time, what we did in the anti-porn movement was to say that pornography objectifies women. And it was a really good logical argument. And it still is a really good logical argument. But now we have data to back that up. And it comes from actually doing MRIs on men as they watch pornography. Look inside their brain. What areas are firing up when they're looking at porn? And when they look at porn, when men look at pornography, the parts of the brain, the areas of the brain that light up, that are active when they're looking at porn, are the parts of the brain that refer to objects, not to people. So we know from a database perspective that porn objectifies, because when men are looking at it, they're actually thinking of the individual on the screen as an object, not as a person. And why that is so insidious is that when we objectify someone, when we make them less than human, it makes violence against them so much more possible. So what's happening to the brains today of the millennial generation and those that come after it, and indeed some older people, is that the neural pathways are being rerouted. So what on earth are neural pathways? They're basically different lanes of traffic that go throughout the brain. One thing leads to another. I see a hamburger, I want to eat it. Okay, yeah, that goes together. Any number of things that get fused together. Well, the way that our brains start out is at a certain age, you see someone, you find them physically attractive, you find them sexually attractive, you want to be with them. Well, what's happening now is as teens and people in their 20s and all of these folks watch more and more porn, their brains are rerouted to no longer prefer people, but to prefer pixels. And what high-speed internet pornography has done is it's given them so much novelty, so many different images to look at, so many supranormal stimuli that the brain can't handle it. Okay, so it actually changes. It changes its form to adapt to their environment. And there's actually, and that happens with more and more porn use, of course. There was a recent experimental study done, which is how you determine cause and effect, of course. And what they found was that men who were exposed to pornography, they were unable to delay gratification, and not just sexual gratification, just all over the map. They became in tune to being able to press and click for the reward. In the case of pornography, obviously, that you would know what that would be. But just in general, and as a life skill, they lost the ability to delay gratification. They also had problems with their short-term memory, where that slowed down, where they no longer were able to process as many things in their short-term memory. So there are more harms than just to sexual functioning and otherwise. Well, obviously, my primary expertise is in sexual violence. And I want to tell you a little bit about the research on the connection between sexual violence and pornography. There are right now 100 studies that have shown direct connections between pornography and violence. There are now over 50 studies drawing a direct link between pornography and sexual violence. Not one, not two, nothing, over 50. And the same results keep occurring, whether these studies are correlational, whether they're cross-sectional, experimental, longitudinal, no matter really what method we're using. Find over and over again a direct link between pornography and sexual violence. Now, please don't mishear me. Everybody who watches porn doesn't commit rape. But there is a direct link, and I'm going to unpack that a bit. Now, one of the things that happens when men, particularly men, watch porn is that they think that they're actually they think that women are actually things that exist to sexually please men, and that was a study of 20,000 people. Now, one of the things that porn does is it gives people permission-giving beliefs. Well, what's a permission-giving belief? It's something in the mind that helps you kind of ignore your conscience, maybe, and say, well, I guess this really is okay. And that's what porn does. Several more studies I want to share with you. One is, we've known for a long time that impulsive men are at more risk for committing sexual violence. Indeed, if you combine someone who's impulsive with someone who uses pornography frequently, you're going to see a whole lot more sexual violence from that individual. Another common theory as to why rape tends to occur is if you have a man who's very much wanting impersonal sex, don't want to know her name, don't want to know anything about her, just want to get in, get out, move on. Okay, if they really want impersonal sex and they have this hostility towards women, they really just think, women are, let me not use the words, but just that women are horrible. We've always known that a lot of those guys tend to commit rape, but it's not all of them. It's just a lot of them. Well, then in a study, they added in frequent porn use. And it then became an if and when condition. So in other words, if someone is into impersonal sex, hostility, and if they're frequent porn users, then they are much more likely to rape. So pornography is like the gasoline on the fire of the individual who wants impersonal sex and hostility. Now, porn is not the sole cause for rape, but it gives men the permission to be sexually violent. And the main point I want to make with you all is that anyone who has an agenda to end sexual violence, you must look at pornography. You must be examining what pornography is doing to this generation and the ones to follow if you want to be effective, whether that's through legislation, whether that's through prevention program, or anything. We have got to tackle the public health problem of pornography. Now, you've heard a bit about sexual dysfunction. Here's the interesting thing I want to tell you about that. In the 40s, less than 1% of men had erectile dysfunction, and these are men under 30, by the way, which is how one would expect. Not many men under 30 would have erectile dysfunction. And then in 1992, it rose to 7%, more porn's available. After the internet, high-speed access, 33% of men under 30 have erectile dysfunction. We don't really need to wonder too much about what's going on here. Another study found that erectile dysfunction doubled in the military in the last 10 years. And in fact, if men are addicted to porn, well over half of them have erectile dysfunction. And they have erectile dysfunction with a person, but not with porn. So I get the question every once in a while, well, haven't you heard about this study that showed that porn and sexual violence aren't connected? Well, okay. You know, in the land of social science research, what do we function with? We go with the weight of the evidence, okay? We go with probabilities. And that's what we have. We're not chemists. Some days I wish I were a chemist. You know, it's like mix this and this, it's always going to turn out the same way. People aren't like that, but we deal with probabilities. Well, what I want to explain to you is the odds, the collective odds that 50 studies against pornography that have shown a decrement, what are the odds that pornography and sexual violence really aren't connected? What about all these 50 studies that have shown that? What are the odds that they're wrong? Well, here's the odds that they're wrong. 1 in 88 decillion, 1 in 817 nonillion, 841 octillion, 970 septillion, 12 sextillion, 523 quintillion, 233 quadrillion, 890 trillion, 533 billion, 447,265,625. So you can go with the weight of that evidence, or you can deceive yourself. Now, you're talking about 88 distrillion. What is that? And this is my last point. If you were to take pennies and fill up this whole room with pennies, you think that'd be a lot of pennies? Obviously. If you were to fill up the Empire State Building, the building I have up here, with pennies, would that be a lot of pennies? I would guess so. Let's try 1 billion Empire State Buildings full of pennies. The odds that there's no link between porn and sexual violence is walking into one of 1 billion Empire State Buildings at random, walking to the correct floor, to the correct room, and picking out that correct penny. We need to stop thinking, are they connected, and say they definitely are. And we also know that pornography is directly implicating sexual violence all over the place. And what I really want to ask you to do is to start to look at this as a nationwide, in fact, a worldwide public health issue, because it is. And we've got to start doing something about it today. Thank you very much.